And Heidi, would you offer our prayer for us?
I sure will.
Thanks so much.
Dear Father in heaven, as we meet on this cold wintry day, we are indeed grateful for the opportunity to stop and take a moment for some learning. May we be blessed in our quest for continuing in our knowledge. May we be able to learn of ways that we can relate these truths to our lives, and that it may help better us as a person and as individual people. We're grateful for the opportunity, as always, to learn through the context of the restored gospel, and we ask for thy Spirit to be with us in our endeavors this day, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Heidi, for that prayer. It'll be a great class today. I'm really looking forward to it. Today we're going to focus on Shooting an Elephant, that short story by George Orwell, and I'd like us to look at it as a literary window into the world of British imperialism. So Shooting an Elephant was written in 1936. It was by George Orwell, who you may know is the author of either 1984 or Animal Farm. He wrote both of those. And it's based on Orwell's service in Burma as an officer in the British Imperial Police. So we'll see a lot of himself in the essay or short story. Here are just our objectives for today. Number one, to better understand the complexities of imperialism by putting ourselves in the shoes of colonizers and colonized. And number two, and these are in no particular order, of course, to feel the need to become more committed disciples of Jesus Christ, to treat others as Jesus would treat them, and to stand for truth regardless of peer pressure. Okay, so with those objectives in mind then, let's reason together. What's the setting for the story? What did you get from your reading? And this story is pages 51 through 56 in the primary source readings if you would like to follow along.
Well, can I just ask a question? Where exactly is Burma?
Yeah, well that's actually coming up then on the next slide. I have a map for you. So excellent. So we're in Burma. That's the setting, and here we go. Burma is the present-day country of Myanmar. And if you look over here, and I have a little drawing tool, here is what was called Upper Burma, and then Lower Burma, and today we call this area of the world Myanmar. And so it's next here, as you'll see, to Assam, which is a part was a part of India at this time, and then Bengal, which is present-day Bangladesh. We see Bhutan here, and Nepal, and then all of India, present-day Pakistan over here, present-day Sri Lanka over here. So, does that answer your question, Heidi?
Yes, it does. Thank you. So Japan from there is where? West of there?
Yep. Keep going this way.
Okay.
You have Indonesia and a bunch of islands in here, and then you have, of course, China going up this way, and then Japan is over here.
Okay, great.
And then Korea is over there.
Of course, you got to fit that Korea in there, don't you?
That's right. I wouldn't want to forget Korea. Definitely.
Okay.
Well, so there we are in the world. Yes, go ahead.
What was the question then? You said something about you wanted us to tell you about the setting of the story, or?
Well, you answered it. It was Burma.
Okay. Burma. Okay.
Yeah, you got it right. So yeah, that's the map, and so now we're all thinking of the same area of the world as we talk about this today. There we go. Okay. So here's the next reasoning question then. A couple basic questions at the beginning that help get us rolling as we understand this story. What's the profession of the narrator?
He was a police officer.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. You got it. He's a police officer. And so next question then would be, why do you think the profession of the narrator is important to the story?
Well, because he's looked as an authority figure.
Hmm? Yeah, definitely. So he's an authority figure, so we'll get that point of view. Excellent. Welcome, Walter. How are you?
Good.
Good. Well, welcome. We've just been talking about the story written by George Orwell, and the setting is Burma, present-day Myanmar. We're talking about the narrator and his profession as a police officer and why that was important. He was an authority figure, as Heidi said, that great comment. And let's see, would you add anything else, Walter or Christina? Why do you think that might be important? There are a few reasons that you might be able to think of. Well, let's take a look then. If we look here are a few that's really important. Number one, there's this irony, because as Heidi said, right, he's an authority figure, but as he talked about, he said that the only time in my life that I have been important enough to be hated, because he talked about how he was hated by large numbers of people in Lower Burma. And he said that, really in England he'd been a nobody, so to speak, right? But here he's a somebody. And so this is sort of one of those ironies of colonialism that, right, because of, what we've talked about in these notions of, sort of racial hierarchy and, the colonizer being above the colonized and that sort of thing, he's put in this position where he is in authority, and not just in authority by virtue of his profession, but also by virtue of being British. So this is very interesting irony. Also, he doesn't make imperial policy, right? That's done in London. That's done in Europe. He just carries it out. So we'll get a very interesting perspective, right? He's not the person who carved up Africa or carved up the islands of the Pacific for different European nations. He is somebody who, on the ground is doing his duty, and so he gives us this very, very interesting perspective as he carries out his duty. Perspective, as we shows us that he's stuck between European officials and the native colonized. And so because of this interesting perspective, being a man in the middle, he's able to praise and criticize both European officials and the native colonized because of his unique perspective. Welcome, Wendy. How are you today?
Having problems, so I just called in on the phone.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Just problems with Brain Honey or with GoToMeeting or your computer, or what's up?
Well, I didn't get your email, but Leland says it was sent to me, so for some reason it didn't arrive. And then also, when Leland sent me the email, I tried to log in using the headset, and it's just getting weird, echoey, drawn-out vowels from the computer. I don't know. I'll just stick with this for now.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know why, but I'm very sorry that it's not working.
That's right.
Yeah, we've just sort of started talking a little bit about about the setting, about the narrator, and so we've just been talking about how as sort of a man in the middle, he has this very unique perspective of one who can both praise and criticize both the colonizer and the colonized, and so he'll give us a lot of insights into imperialism in India. Okay, well, if we relate his interesting position as a man in the middle then, and relate it to this poem that we've read, Kipling's The White Man's Burden, right, from 1899. We've looked at this before. What sticks out to you as being some lines or stanzas that you could relate to his position as this man in the middle?
Well, I would say the last two lines of the second stanza, to seek another's profit and work another's gain, probably applied there.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he was probably, I'm sure he was making a wage as a police officer, but he's really working for Britain. So it's more their gain and their profit than it is his own, I guess, in a sense, but it's for himself too. But
right. That's a great comment, because certainly the raw materials, the new markets, I mean, they're not directly benefiting him, other than he's assigned as a military police or colonial police, if you will, and he's getting his wages as an officer in the police force. But certainly, he's not benefiting the most from this, right? As you rightly said, Heidi. What else would we say? Walter, do you see any lines that kind of stick out to you that explain how the policeman feels?
I see another one in the fifth one where it says, the hate of those ye guard. He talks about how they would scoff at him all the time.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great one, right? Take up the white man's burden, reap his old reward. And so you ask yourself, well, what's his reward? Well, Kipling is saying the blame of those ye better, that's a reward. The hate of those ye guard, right? That's what they're getting in return, for their, colonial administration in places like India. Yeah, great. Okay, what else would we say? Anything else? Walter, do you see anything you'd like to comment on?
I'm not seeing anything right now, but...
Okay. Okay, well, certainly, it's interesting that as Heidi was talking about, seeking another profit, working another's gain, that he really is caught in between. And it's interesting because as he talks about how these captives here in the first stanza, right, your new caught, sullen people, they're, half devil, half child. There's this very interesting dynamic where, he's there to help them, and at the same time, they create problems for him. And so, really, he sees them in this very interesting way, and we'll see how that, carries on itself, throughout the story. As well as, one more line to point out before we move on. He talks about how, when your goal is nearest and the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly bring your hopes to naught, right? And so how really, the natives are getting in the way of, the purposes of imperialism in some ways. And so it'll be interesting as we keep that in mind as we talk about the events of this short story or essay. Welcome, Caden. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. So, from the first paragraph on page 51, what are some evidences of how the Burmese about the British? The very first paragraph there, I found at least 7 of them.
Well, are you talking about specific words? It talks about sneering yellow faces, the insults that were hooted at him, the jeers at the Europeans, that the young Buddhist priests were the worst of all.
Yep.
He was a target whenever he went out. He wasn't really protected.
What about when he played soccer? This one really kind of, I could feel this one because I'm a soccer player.
Yeah, the referee just looked the other way. He was glad he had, got tripped.
That's right. Yeah. So he'd be tripped up by the opposing team, and the referee would look the other way, that sort of thing. Remember the lady walking through the bazaar or the marketplace, and they'd spit on her dress, that sort of thing. Very interesting. The jeering. So certainly, there's lots going on. So here's a question then, as we relate this to ourselves: how would you have reacted to the anti-European sentiment about which Orwell writes? What do you think? Or how would you have wanted to react?
I think coming from where he was coming from, where he saw the evils of imperialism, and he was such a thoughtful person, it makes it all the harder for him because he feels like, hey, I'm on your side, and you guys are spitting at me. It would have made it even harder to respond in a Christ-like manner because you feel like you're one of the only people who understands them. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. That is such a good point because at least in my life, I have seen time and time again how, if people don't mean, to offend me and something happens, it's easy to just say, oh, no big deal. If they mean to offend me, it's a little harder. Certainly I still need to just have it roll off my back, but it's a little harder. But then especially, if you've gone out of your way to help somebody and then, they misunderstand you and impute bad motives to you and say mean things, boy, sometimes it's just so hard, so hard. I mean, certainly as a teacher, you're constantly trying to help students, and there are some students, of course, who are very grateful, and then others who make you kind of sad sometimes when, they kind of really just push back against your best efforts to help, and in fact sometimes turn you into the bad guy, so to speak. And so, yeah, I think that's a very well-reasoned comment, Wendy, and I appreciate that one. And certainly, I love how you pointed out too that he is a thoughtful man. This is a very neat short story here. This narrator is a complex figure and it's got a lot of depth to him. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to weigh in on this one?
I think part of me would just want to leave, just because if you don't believe in the cause and the people don't seem to like you, it would be very hard to stick in and stick it out and try to keep helping. I think that'd be hard to do.
Yeah, definitely, right? And I'm sure, we've all felt that feeling of, boy, maybe I'm just in the wrong place because my heart's not in this. I'd rather not be here than go along with something I don't believe in, et cetera. And so that's another, great point, Christina. Thank you so much for that. Of course, I thought of this great scripture that was sort of alluded to here, Matthew 5:43 through 48. And Wendy, I apologize that you can't see it today. Once again, I really am sorry about the technology. But certainly, very famous, ye have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, and remember, the Sermon on the Mount is all about transcendence, sending the old laws, for the new, saying, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. Goes on and talks about how basically, it's easy to love people who love you, but being Christ-like really means loving those who don't love you. And at the end of that, I just think it's so neat to see that this comes at the very end of this injunction by the Savior, be therefore perfect. And so what do we think about this? Of course, this is a hard counsel, but what would you say?
Well, from personal experience, I would say that this is one of the hardest challenges to overcome. But maybe it's just me. But when you were giving the situation earlier where if you do something and you come across with good intentions and someone takes it badly, how it's that much harder versus if you think if they come back at you, it's just that much harder. And then as far as I just think this is so interesting. If they already love you back, then what reward is that? But if you can love someone who doesn't love you, I'm just saying from personal experience, this is probably my very hardest challenge in life. It's to just have a loving heart anyway. It's just really hard because you feel a lot of rejection. And like Christina says, you just want to get away from the situation.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. That's a great comment. And certainly, I'm sure this is something that we all struggle with because, especially, when your heart is invested and, you feel that you're doing all you can't understand why somebody wouldn't love you or accept you or whatever. Definitely. It's very challenging. Would anybody else like to comment?
I have another comment. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
I'm hoping Josh won't speak up right this moment.
It's okay.
I was thinking about a talk given by Elder Worthland probably about 5 years ago about kindness, and there's a part at the end where he says, but what if somebody's very annoying, and he says, love them. What if they're gossiping? Love them. What if they say all these bad things about you? Just love them. Like he says it with all these different situations, which makes me realize that the Lord is uncompromising in this commandment that we need to love everybody no matter what they do to us or what we think that they're doing that's wrong or right or anything. And it is difficult. It's very difficult because you want to kind of have some of those exceptions. Oh, well, that person's being very mean, so I don't really need to love them and try to be patient. I think we all kind of maybe a little bit in our hearts hope that we can just kind of get away with being angry at somebody, but the Lord really is uncompromising in it. And like I said before, running away does seem to be what we want to do, and in some situations we can't, and so we need to face it and try to learn to be like Heavenly Father, who is also one who does not hate anybody and uses love in every situation. He's somehow, attained this, and that's what we're trying to do.
Right, yeah. Thank you so much for that great comment and that great reference to Elder Worthland. If we look then and we keep going, we think about the narrator and how he feels. If we look on that paragraph at the bottom of 51 that then sprawls onto page 52, right, how does the narrator feel about imperialism?
He wasn't sure whether to hate Britain more or the people who were beaming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, Heidi. Would anybody else add anything? Well, if we look here, here's part of his judgment of imperialism. Walter, would you like to read this for us, please?
Sure. I had already made up my mind. Imperialism was an evil thing, and the sooner I checked up my job and get out of it, the better. Theoretically and secretly, of course, I was all for the Burmese and all against their oppressors, the British. As for the job I was doing, I hated it more bitterly than I can perhaps make clear. In a job like that, you see the dirty work of empire at close quarters, the wretched prisoners huddling in the stinking cages of the lockups, the gray cowed faces of the long-term convicts, the scared buttocks of the men who had been bogged with bamboos. All these oppressed me with an intolerable sense of guilt.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And then as we think about this dilemma that Heidi brought up, right, sort of who to hate more, right, as he's struggling with this, here's his dilemma. He said, all I knew was that I was stuck between my hatred of the empire I served and my rage against the evil-spirited little beasts who tried to make my job impossible. With one part of my mind, I thought of the British Raj, or the British rule in India, as an unbreakable tyranny, as something clamped down in seculae seculorum, meaning forever and ever, upon the will of prostrate peoples. With another part, I thought that the greatest joy in the world would be to drive a bayonet into a Buddhist priest's guts. Feelings like these are the normal byproducts of imperialism. And so we can see certainly, right, he's struggling. He's struggling with being perfect, right, like his Father in heaven, with this counsel from Matthew 5, just struggling with the situation of being caught in the middle between two bad alternatives here. Well, it's interesting. How would we relate Matthew 6:24, this great scripture, also from the Sermon on the Mount? No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon, or worldly riches. How would you relate it?
Well, I'm having a hard time relating this to him specifically because he didn't hate one and love the other. He hated them both for what they were doing. So that's why I'm having a hard time relating this.
Okay. Do you see, though, that he might feel that he perhaps has two masters, one his conscience and two the British government telling him what to do, and how he can't really serve both and feel good about himself?
Okay, yeah, when you put the master as your conscience or God instead of, I'm looking at the two masters as Britain and the people of the Burmese. So, yeah, I guess the one master I should always be thinking the first master is God, but in my trite little mind, I'm not thinking that way. So.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. That was a great question. I'm glad that we were able to clarify that. But yeah, so how would you relate that? I mean, he's in a tough spot. What would you do? What should he do?
Well, doesn't it come back to, sorry, Wendy, I was just going to say, doesn't this come back to the same thing that we've talked about, no matter what subject we've talked about? You could be in a really bad situation, and it always comes down to how you conduct yourself personally. So I don't know if he was forced to be there as an officer, if he chose to be there as an officer, or whatever, however he got there, but him trying to be kind to those who are being unkind to him is probably really all he's left with.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's a great point. Wendy, was it you who also wants to comment?
Well, I felt like him putting this down on paper was a step in a process of helping him purge some guilt, because he obviously in this situation chose to serve someone other than his conscience.
Right.
He chose to serve his pride, and he feels horrible about it, and he couldn't even watch the elephant die. He had to leave.
Right.
And it clearly affected him really, really deeply. Yeah,
definitely. Thank you so much for that. And certainly, if we try to serve two masters, eventually, we just won't be able to do it. And Orwell got out of the service, ended up going back to England, and as Wendy said, writing about the experience. Definitely. Thank you so much for that. Well, so here's something. The narrator tells us of an event that is enlightening, a tiny incident in itself, but one that teaches the real nature of imperialism, the real motives for which despotic governments act. That was from page 52. What does the incident with the elephant, all the things involved with it, teach about the nature and motives of imperialism? In other words, what is it and why is it done? Do you agree or disagree with Orwell?
Well, when I was reading this, I kept waiting to find the answer to what is it, because I did read, that this is the real nature. And so I don't think we got the answer till the very end, did we? Where it just talked about that they don't want to look like a fool and that it's about pride and power. Is that what it is, or did I miss it?
No, that's a big part of it for sure. Who would add to what Heidi said? Heidi's got the root of it.
Trying to act like you have the answer? I don't know. Is that what it is? He's trying to act like he has the right answer, right? He's always putting forth this facade that he's in charge, even though he knows he's really not. He's just doing his job.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely a big part of it. And, it is very interesting if you think about just what happens with the elephant, because as we'll see in the next few slides, there are two different ways you could view the experience with the elephant, and they're actually opposite, but they're both just as true, if you will, about teaching lessons about imperialism. So it's very interesting. But yeah, I'd like others to weigh in. How would you respond to Heidi's great question about is there anything else?
I don't know if this is anything else, but I kind of felt like imperialism, once it's unleashed, just like this elephant was unleashed, you're pretty much faced with two nasty alternatives. You either sit and wait to see if the elephant's under control and who else is it going to kill in the meantime, or do you just shoot it, which you don't feel right about. It's kind of like if you've unleashed the monster to begin with, you really have two bad choices in front of you, and to me that's what imperialism is. If you've unleashed that monster in your country, the motives for greed and all those other things that go along with it, there is no good way to solve the problem down the road.
Yeah, excellent. That's a great point. In fact, and that's exactly what we'll see as we move on then. So let's get to that elephant, right? That's what the story's about, shooting an elephant. So the elephant, right, was not a wild elephant, okay? It was a tame animal that had, quote, gone must. Now, I had to look this up. I'm not sure if you knew must, so don't feel bad if you did. But what does gone must mean? Either, what did you deduce, or if you looked it up, what do you think it means?
I just substituted the word crazy. Gone crazy.
Sure. Yeah, crazy, right? And specifically, if we look at the etymology, right, it's from Hindi and Urdu, mast, or however you pronounce it in those languages, meaning intoxicated, okay, which is also it's from Persian. But a definition, right, would be a periodic state of the bull elephant characterized especially by aggressive behavior and usually connected with the rutting or mating season. Okay, so that's what this is, right? He's having a bout of this. Definition of must, and something you can also spell it with a TH, or, at the end instead of just a T. And so, if we think about this elephant then rampaging because he'd gone must, what had the elephant done during its rampage in the village? What are the different things that the narrator points out?
He talks about hurting people, especially killing the one man, ruining homes and villages, things in the village he's knocking down.
Yeah.
Destroying property. I was surprised though how the natives reacted to the death of that man when Orwell was out there asking for information about the elephant, that nobody bothered to tell him that he'd killed a man. They were just so flippant about it. Right.
Yeah. Very interesting, right? And so once again, this is why he has this great perspective of, yeah, he's not painting the colonized in this rosy, oh, they're all oppressed, they were all wonderful and look what we did to them type of picture, right? He's saying, boy, they had some issues too, but yet also, right, we had some issues, and so if we look specifically at these incidents, it's actually really neat to try to put symbols to them, to connect meaning to them, because you have to remember, this story is, and it's up for debate, partly based on truth, partly based on Orwell's own experiences in Burma, but also some of it's made up. And so there are a lot of symbols that are part of this to help the reader. And so if the elephant represents British imperialism in Burma, this will be the first representation, okay, what could the following event symbolize? So I want you to think of these events and think of what they could symbolize. A tame elephant that had gone must, ravaging the bazaar or marketplace. The Burmese had no weapons and were helpless against the elephant, destroying a bamboo hut, killing a cow, raiding fruit stands, turning over the city trash van, killing an Indian man whose arms were crucified, as Orwell states, in death. What do you think any of those might symbolize in terms of what British imperialism did in India?
Well, the
Well, I like
first
that.
one, go ahead.
Sorry, I was interested in killing a cow. Am I right to assume that in Burma the religion considers the cow as sacred?
Well, so Burma is split between Buddhists, right, and then also Hindus. But yes, for the Hindus, right, the cow would be sacred.
Because that to me just seems to symbolize British, just the British being kind of flippant or not respectful of the natives' religion.
Mm-hmm. Sure, right, that's a great interpretation. How would you interpret any of the others?
The elephant that had gone must is like being ruled by its hormones and getting out of control. Is like the motives that drove imperialism, a country being taken over by greed and not being ruled by, no longer being self-governed, letting other forces control them, other motives.
Yeah, excellent, right? Whether greed or pride, or I guess they're also all rooted in pride, right? Definitely. Thank you for that. What about ravaging the bazaar or the marketplace?
That kind of ties into the British and the other powers that were colonizing, looking for new marketplaces so that they can kind of take over, sell their products, take resources and raw materials away from the country. Just all about those kind of economic motives.
Yeah, definitely, right? Economic exploitation. Excellent. What about the Burmese had no weapons and they're helpless against this elephant, right? It's the elephant of the British Empire. What does that mean?
Well, I think that's just that the colonized people, imperialism, they can't really defend themselves against whoever is colonizing them, because colonizing their land, because they're not industrialized. They don't have guns and just big things like that.
Yeah, excellent, Walter. Right, excellent. Right, we have the industrialized world conquering the non-industrialized world. Perfect. Right. I mean, of course, you can talk a lot about all these, but the bamboo hut, sort of, taking the soul, taking the home, over in the countries that were colonized. The fruit stands can go specifically to, taking raw materials. The city trash van, taking over local government, right? So taking self-governance out of the localities, whether it be Africa, India, Asia, etc. Okay, and then this one's an interesting one, right? Killing the Indian man, and then Orwell talks specifically about how when he was killed there, smashed into the ground, how his arms were they were stuck straight out in this sort of crucified position, right? Any ideas as what that might symbolize? Because it's a powerful symbol.
Well, isn't it a rejection of Christianity?
It definitely could be, right? It definitely could say Christianity or just Westernization, right? With Christianity being one of its characteristics, has come in and stamped on the native culture, the native religion, native way of doing things, etc. Yes, definitely.
Can I just ask a question before we move on? I don't really understand how the turning over of the city trash van, how does that relate to taking over government? I'm not seeing the connection.
Oh, well, it was a municipal trash van, right? And so if you think of it just metaphorically, turning over something that did the work of a city, right? Because a municipal trash van was responsible for picking up garbage within a city to help the city run and govern itself locally, so to speak. By turning that over, right, you were stopping the very means by which the native peoples governed themselves and replacing instead, their local government with, a colonial administration and a centralized bureaucratic European government.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a great question, Heidi. Well, if we look then, okay, and if we turn the coin, okay, which is very interesting, if the elephant represents the colonized and their culture, so instead of the British Empire, but if the elephant represents the colonized in their culture, what could the following quote symbolize? Quote, I had no intention of shooting the elephant. I had merely sent for the rifle to defend myself if necessary. Always unnerving to have a crowd following you. I marched down the hill looking and feeling a fool with the rifle over my shoulder and an ever-growing army of people jostling at my heels. Any ideas about this one?
I just didn't look at it this deep. So I'm having to
Okay.
read this and think.
Just that, when imperialism took over the hearts of these countries, they probably didn't think through their actions. They had no intention of creating the kinds of destruction that they created.
Mm-hmm.
They were merely sending away for ideas for how to expand themselves.
Right.
With not seeing too far ahead of how it would all play out.
Definitely, it's a great comment, Wendy. And as you think about it, right, so much of this was on competition. As nations industrialized, they needed markets. As they had a surplus of goods, nobody to buy it. They went elsewhere. But then when one country went elsewhere, other countries said, "Wow, this is a great idea. We should go elsewhere too." And then they started competing for markets. And that competition led to military clashes, and so there was a need for these, defensive ports and the creation of trade networks, and you had to protect your ports, and et cetera, et cetera. And so really, you start to see this sort of domino effect that comes from competition, right? And so really, they're just trying to defend themselves in some ways, right, in their minds, right, in this competitive world of European powers, industrialized powers. They didn't realize, you could say, that they were going to, as Wendy was saying, sort of rip the heart and soul out of these cultures as a byproduct of just trying to defend themselves, etc. So certainly, an interesting thing to think about. Well, if we look, I have this same quote then, and I'm going to ask a question that's the same other than one letter, okay? And the letter's going to change at the end. We'll go from colonizer to colonized, R to D. And so here, right, this great quote from page 53, as soon as I saw the elephant, I knew with perfect certainty that I ought not to shoot him. It is a serious matter to shoot a working elephant, and it is comparable to destroying a huge and costly piece of machinery. And obviously one ought not to do it if it can possibly be avoided. And at that distance, peacefully eating, the elephant looked no more dangerous than a cow. Moreover, I did not in the least want to shoot him. So, if you reason then, in our 4Ring process, what could the quote mean if the elephant represents the colonizer?
That it would be very costly to stop all these colonies, to stop Britain from colonizing all these places. It would come at a great cost.
Yeah, definitely. Right, a great cost. If we look on the flip side then, and this is a different slide, okay, this is the colonized, right? What could this quote mean if the elephant represents the colonized, right, the culture?
That's not necessarily right to just destroy a culture, even if you think yours is, superior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love this quote. He says, I knew with perfect certainty I ought not to shoot him, right? And so, deep down, this conscience, right, this light of Christ, is telling him the right answer. If we reason then again, okay, from this quote here, why does the narrator feel he has, in quotes, has to shoot the elephant, even though his conscience tells him he shouldn't? Why does he feel he has to do it? What's the bottom line?
Well, he says that they can never have, that it would never do to have them laugh at him. I guess because that would make them look weak.
Yeah, definitely,
and then
right?
they would probably really realize the power they had over them. That the colonized really had a lot more power over the British imperialists than they thought they did. And they could never have that, or their plan wouldn't work, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you think of places like South Africa, it was 4-to-1, natives to whites, and so this was a scary thing to think that you could empower them by not acting like you had the authority and you had everything covered, etc. And so yeah, they would laugh at me. This is very interesting. I mean, this is an interesting psychological study here about actions. Let's relate this to 1 Nephi 8:26-28. This great quote from Lehi's vision. He talks about the tree, and he talks about this great and spacious building, and he talks about the people with the fine dress and how they were in the attitude of mocking and pointing finger towards those who had come and were partaking of the fruit. And after they had tasted of the fruit, they were ashamed because of those that were scoffing at them, and they fell away into forbidden paths and were lost. How would we relate this?
Well, it just teaches of the nature of man, that we are so influenced by what other people think over what the right thing to do really is.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Right? Certainly the bottom line for us here. And if we look then, and we think about how, of course, there's this progression, right? He feels he has to do it. He's thinking about doing it. He's trying to see, well, maybe it'll just be tame enough that I can say, oh, no, it's fine. Maybe I can just leave it alone. But there's a crowd behind me. What do? I feel this pressure. At this moment in the story, he gives us this very juicy quote, right, about imperialism. So as we read this quote, I want you to reason. What do we learn about imperialism from it? And Christina, would you read this one for us, please?
Sure. It was at this moment, as I stood there with the rifle in my hands, that I first grasped the hollowness, the futility of the white man's dominion in the East. Here was I, the white man with his gun, standing in front of the unarmed native crowd, seemingly the leading actor of the piece. But in reality I was only an absurd puppet, pushed to and fro by the will of those yellow faces behind. I perceived in this moment that when the white man turns tyrant, it is his own freedom that he destroys. He becomes a sort of hollow, posing dummy. He wears a mask and his face grows to fit it.
Okay. What do we learn about imperialism from this quote?
I think that's so powerful. The white man when the white man turns tyrant, it is his own freedom that he destroys. That is just incredibly powerful.
Definitely. Would you like to elaborate on that for us, Wendy?
Well, it's not in a way that would have ever occurred to me, because I didn't really ever factor in this idea of feeling like a fool. But in this case and many other cases, I can see now how people acted against their own best judgment. They made choices that weren't the right ones because they felt it was their only choice. And so really through their own making, some of their freedom was taken away. But I don't know. I see it in a way I never would have seen it before.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I appreciate your deep thinking about this quote. There's just so much to it. Well, if we look in Genesis 39:7-12, we won't read all of it, but this is the great story about Joseph. Potiphar's wife. He's there in the room. She wants to be with him. He knows it's wrong. He says, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And then, she keeps pushing, and he runs away. And he literally flees to the point that, she's left with his garment in her hand, and he's running away down the street. And so, how does that relate, would you say?
Well, that's an example of doing the right thing no matter how much of a fool you might look in the end, because as we know the story goes, she gets him in huge trouble and he ends up in prison. But I'm sure, well, you know, I'm pretty sure that he didn't regret what he did because he felt good in his heart that he did the right thing.
Yeah, definitely, right? And that's why this is, you know, this great scripture, you know, scripture mastery in seminary. How then can I do this great wickedness? And so, you know, yeah, he ran away. He certainly looked the fool running down the street without his clothes, looked the fool when he was thrown into prison, but yet he could live with himself. He could live with his God because he knew he had done the right thing. Well, if we look at this then, there's this quote here from the end, and of course, you know, by this point, I'm not sure, but you know, I certainly get very choked up thinking about this story as I read it all the way through and come to this point by page 55. I want you to reason in our 4-O'ing process, what could killing the elephant mean if the elephant represents the colonizer, right? And of course, here's this sad quote about this act at the end.
Well, I guess he's referring to that sentence he says way at the beginning. I did not, he says, I was young and ill-educated at the time. I didn't even know the British Empire was dying. Still less did I know that it was a great deal better than the younger empires that were going to supplant it. Is that what he's referring to, do you think? That the death of the British Empire and the greater evil that would come to replace it?
Yeah, definitely, right? So we look at this, you know, we think of this sort of the noble beast rising one more time before it dies, but yet it still dies, and it goes down trumpeting, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Just, you know, how hard it was, you know, to see this mighty empire, you know, rise and fall, and you think about sort of this ultimate solution of, boy, you know, what's really the only way to stop the ill effects of British colonialism in India? Well, it's to bring it down. Just like this elephant. If we look at the quote then from the perspective of the elephant being the colonized, right, what lesson do we learn? What lesson can we reason if we think about, once again, but in falling, he seemed for a moment to rise, for as his hind legs collapsed beneath him, he seemed to tower upwards like a huge rock toppling, his trunk reaching skyward like a tree. He trumpeted for the first and only time, etc., then down he came. So how, if we flip the coin then, how would we reason?
The death of their soul, the death of their culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was a drawn-out death, not something very quick.
Yeah, definitely, right? On both accounts, sort of, you know, realizing that, wow, I am here on a mission to kill such a noble thing, and how sad that is to watch as it drags on and on over time. You know, certainly, as we look at this message, right, that dragging on over and again, that's what this quote, you know, talks about. It seemed dreadful to see the great beast lying there, powerless to move, and yet powerless to die, right? And you think about these cultures, you know, in limbo for so long, as they struggle to hang on, as they're killed day by day by these different encroachments, right, by force. So, you know, very powerful. If we reason and relate then, he said, in the end, I could not stand it any longer and went away. What do we learn about the narrator's conscience from this line, and how does it relate to our choices?
He may have physically removed himself, but he certainly never got this moment out of his head. And so they're really, you know, when we don't follow our conscience, there really is no way to escape the consequences of that. It has to be repented of.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Right. Running away won't change the fact that we did something. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. This is another interesting part at the end. You know, he's sort of going through the rationalization process, and he said, well, besides, legally, I had done the right thing. For a mad elephant has to be killed like a mad dog if its owner fails to control it. And so what do we think about this quote? And if we think about, you know, principle number 4, conscience being the most sacred of all property, how does this reason and relate then for us?
I guess what I think of is that it's pretty easy to justify something and say, well, but technically this was a good thing, but it doesn't really change what happened. So we need to be careful that we're not justifying away something that we did that we know deep inside is wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, as one who has sat with people who have said, hey, it's legal, it has to be morally right, and scratched my head. You know, I just thought so much that, you know what, there may come a time when legal does not mean right. There has already come a time when legal does not mean right in many instances, and we have to guard against that and make sure that we stay true to conscience being the most sacred of all property. Certainly, as we have read before, this wonderful quote, one of my favorites, by Dallin H. Oakes when he was president of BYU before he was Elder Oakes here, but from the Ensign, June 1976, talking about how the command of loyalty to laws and rulers does not compel a citizen to participate in or submit to a government edict that runs counter to the common consensus of humanity, such as genocide or other cold-blooded murder, nor should it require a person to violate the fundamental tenets of religious faith. And it goes on, etc. And so as we think about that then, and we connect this to our last slide, right? We end the story. I often wondered whether any of the others grasped that I had done it solely to avoid looking a fool. And we relate that to Elder Oakes, right? Religious Freedom, 2009. We must not be deterred or coerced into silence by the kinds of intimidation I have described. We must insist on our constitutional right and duty to exercise our religion, to vote our conscience on public issues, and to participate in elections and debates in the public square and the halls of justice. So closing this up then, wrapping it up, how would we connect and relate these two quotes?
Well, I just think it's amazing how we can take this story and, you know, if you were studying this over at, you know, the local university, you would just read it and it would be great. But the way we can take it and just so deeply connect it to our lives and realize, really analyze ourselves and ask ourselves if we are doing things for the right reason, if we really are not speaking up because we're afraid of looking stupid, because nowadays if you speak up for what's right, you are bound to look stupid because that's what they're trying to make us out to look like.
Right.
So I guess we should just plan on looking stupid and know we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, no, Heidi, that's a great comment, right? You know, I hope that our fear of looking stupid will never be greater than our fear of displeasing God.
Well, I hope so too, but I'm afraid that I have kept my mouth shut for fear of looking stupid, so I have repenting to do.
Definitely.
Well, and that's what I love about this piece is because, you know, I used to think Orwell was brilliant at observing the foibles in human nature around him, and now I know that he was equally brilliant at observing his own internal foibles, and has done it in a way that inspires the rest of us to do the same and to really take a look at ourselves. I think he's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much, and honestly, thank all of you for the comments today. I was inspired. I was really just moved today by our conversations, and this piece. I mean, this piece moves me every time I read it. It's one of those pieces that, you know, I remember where I was the first time I read it, you know, because it was so powerful, and you know, it's done that again for me today. So thank you so much. I look forward to our class tomorrow, and I hope you have a great day.
All right, thank you.
Mr.
Have a
Gentile?
great day.
Oh, yes, yes.
Mr. Gentile?
Yes.
Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
If I don't log on to tomorrow's meeting on time, will you send me another email because I possibly might have the same problem I had today?
Sure.
Okay.
I will do that. Okay.
I don't know why I didn't get your email because I see that you sent it to me, but for some reason it didn't arrive. So.
Wendy, that happened to me last week. I didn't get it for about 20 minutes.
Huh.
Then that's the first time it's ever happened, but it was weird. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I will try to be aware of that then, and thank you so much for letting me know.
Okay, thanks. See ya.
Take care. Bye.